I was recovering from emergency surgery alone, while my entire family abandoned me to attend my cousin's lavish birthday party. When my mother finally texted demanding money instead of checking my pulse, I made one call and locked down their financial future. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The first thing I registered was the rhythmic, relentless beeping of the heart monitor. It was a sharp, sterile sound that cut through the heavy fog of anesthesia clouding my brain. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt like it was lined with shattered glass. My eyelids fluttered open, fighting against the harsh, fluorescent lights of the recovery room. I was 35, an aggressively healthy corporate auditor who had never spent a night in a hospital, until my appendix decided to rupture in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The pain had been blinding, a white-hot agony that had literally dropped me to the floor of my office. As my vision slowly cleared, the immediate, overwhelming sensation was the throbbing ache in my abdomen, followed quickly by a desperate, hollow need for a familiar face. I turned my head, wincing as the IV line pulled at the back of my hand. I expected to see Layla, my mother, sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl chair by the window. I had given the hospital her number as my emergency contact before the world went dark. She was retired. She had the time. More importantly, she was my mother. But the chair was empty. The room was completely void of any warmth, any flowers, any hushed voices. Just me, the machines, and the lingering scent of antiseptic. A nurse in blue scrubs pushed through the heavy wooden door, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum. "Ah, Ellie, you're awake," she said, her voice gentle, checking the monitors above my head. "The surgery was a success, but it was a close call. You had a severe perforation. How is your pain level?" "Where is my family?" I croaked out, my voice barely above a raspy whisper. "Is my mother in the waiting room?" The nurse's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She averted her eyes, suddenly very interested in adjusting my IV drip. "I'm sorry, honey. The waiting room is empty. The receptionist tried calling the emergency contact number you provided several times while you were in surgery, but it went straight to voicemail." A cold, heavy stone dropped in my stomach, far deeper than the surgical incisions. I fumbled for my personal belongings bag, which had been placed on the bedside table. My fingers were clumsy, numb, but I managed to pull out my phone. The screen lit up, illuminating my pale, exhausted face in the reflection. There were no frantic texts asking if I was alive. No voicemails filled with worried tears. Instead, the top notification was an Instagram alert from my cousin Madeline. I tapped it, my thumbs shaking. The screen filled with a video of a massive, opulent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glittered above a crowd of people dressed in cocktail attire. There was a massive ice sculpture, a towering 5-tier cake, and in the center of it all was Madeline, wearing a sequin designer gown, throwing her head back in a practiced, picture-perfect laugh. The caption read, "Ringing in 30 with the people who matter most. Best birthday ever." I scrolled down. I saw my Uncle Grayson raising a champagne flute in a toast. I saw Madeline's fiancé, Caleb, grinning for the camera. And then, in the background of a group photo, I saw her. Layla, my mother. She was wearing her best silk blouse, laughing warmly, holding a glass of wine, entirely absorbed in the celebration of her niece. They had known I was being rushed into surgery. My assistant had called Layla directly from the ambulance. They knew I was being sliced open, my life hanging in a precarious balance, and they had chosen to go to a birthday party. Then the text from Layla rolled in. Not one, not two, but 5 text messages, followed by 3 missed calls that had come through just minutes ago. I opened the thread, expecting at least a belated apology. "Layla, Ellie, call me the second you wake up. Layla, we need to talk. Layla, it's urgent. Layla, Madeline is trying to close on the venue for the wedding and the trust transfer didn't clear. Layla, why aren't you answering? Call me now. I stared at the glowing screen until the words blurred together. I was lying in a hospital bed, physically broken, entirely alone, and my mother's only concern was funding my cousin's extravagant lifestyle. The silence in the room was deafening. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The emotion. Al's crash hit me harder than the physical trauma. I pressed the button to elevate my bed, every microscopic movement sending flares of pain shooting across my abdomen. I sat there in the sterile silence, the sheer audacity of my family's actions suffocating me. I felt a hot, angry tear track down my cheek, but I angrily wiped it away. Crying felt too weak, too passive for the magnitude of what had just been done to me. I took a shaky breath, braced myself, and hit dial on Layla's contact. She answered on the first ring, the loud, thumping bass of party music echoing through the speaker. "Ellie, finally," Layla's voice boomed, completely devoid of the hushed, anxious tone one might expect when speaking to a child who had just been under the knife. "I was starting to think you were ignoring me." "I was unconscious, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, though my knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. "I was literally having my abdomen cut open to remove a ruptured organ." "Oh, right, the appendix thing," she said dismissively. In the background, I heard someone shout, "Shots," followed by cheering. "Look, I'm glad you're awake and okay. But Ellie, we have a massive problem right now and we need you to fix it." I closed my eyes. "A problem, I see. And what problem could possibly be more important than your daughter being in the ICU?" "Don't be dramatic, Ellie. It's a routine surgery," Layla sighed, the annoyance palpable in her tone. "We are at Madeline's birthday gala, and she just got an email from the event coordinator. The $50,000 deposit for her wedding venue bounced. They're threatening to give her date to someone else by midnight if the wire isn't authorized. You're the executor of your grandmother's trust. You need to log into the portal right now and authorize the release." I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations to keep myself from screaming. "Mom, I am in a hospital bed. I am on heavy narcotics. I am not logging into a financial portal to wire 50 grand so Madeline can secure a ballroom." "Ellie, you are being incredibly selfish right now." Layla's voice rose, adopting that sharp, authoritative tone she used whenever I stepped out of line. "Madeline has been planning this wedding for 2 years. Tonight is her 30th birthday. Grayson spent a fortune on this party, and she is in tears in the bathroom because her dream venue is slipping away. It will take you 2 minutes to log in and sign the authorization." Caleb is furious, and frankly, so am I. "You're furious?" I whispered, the absurdity of the situation wrapping around my lungs like a vice. "You abandoned me, Mom. You let me go into surgery alone. If there had been complications, if my heart had stopped on that table, the hospital wouldn't have been able to reach you because you were too busy drinking champagne with Grayson and Caleb. You're 35 years old, Ellie. You are a grown woman. You don't need your mommy holding your hand for a routine procedure," Layla snapped, completely callous. "Now, stop making this about you. Madeline needs this. The family needs this done. Log in, authorize the wire, and we can talk about your little tummy ache tomorrow." She hung up just like that. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, my chest heaving with slow, ragged breaths. The emotional distress was a physical weight, pressing down on my bruised ribs. I had spent my entire life trying to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the daughter Layla could lean on. And in my most vulnerable moment, she had swatted me away like an annoying insect because her golden niece needed a check cleared. I looked at the black screen of my phone. They thought I was just a walking ATM, an obedient accountant who would rubber stamp their extravagant desires while quietly enduring their neglect. They assumed my loyalty was a given, an endless well they could draw from without consequence. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was a senior corporate forensic auditor. I didn't just sign checks. I tracked money for a living. I found the hidden ledgers, the offshore accounts, the quiet embezzlements that destroyed empires. And I was the sole legal controller of the family trust. To understand the bitter taste of this betrayal, you have to understand the dynamic that had governed my life for the past decade. Ever since my father passed away when I was 22, I had stepped up. Layla had fallen into a deep depression, neglecting the mortgage, the bills, the upkeep of our lives. I had paused my own life, working 80-hour weeks as a junior accountant, paying off her debts, restructuring her retirement, and ensuring she never lost her home. I had sacrificed relationships, vacations, and my own peace of mind to be her rock. And yet, Layla's eyes only truly sparkled when she talked about Madeline. Madeline was my Uncle Grayson's daughter. She was 5 years younger than me, practically raised in a parallel universe of unearned privilege. Grayson, Layla's older brother, was a man who projected immense wealth but had terrible business acumen. He had spoiled Madeline rotten, raising her to believe that she was the main character of reality, and everyone else was just the supporting cast meant to facilitate her happiness. Madeline was stunning, I'll give her that. Polished, impeccably styled, with a wardrobe that cost more than my first car. She called herself a lifestyle influencer and brand consultant, a deliberately vague title that seemed to involve taking luxurious vacations, posting photos of avocado toast, and never actually producing any tangible income. Caleb, her fiancé, was a handsome, empty-headed yes-man who seemed perfectly content to ride her coattails, whatever they were attached to. But what always set off the alarm bells in my auditor's brain was Madeline's intense, inappropriate interest in my grandmother's estate. When my grandmother passed away 3 years ago, she shocked the family by bypassing her own children, Layla and Grayson, and leaving the bulk of her liquid assets in a trust, naming me as the sole executor. My grandmother was sharp. She knew Grayson would blow it on failed ventures and Layla would just hand it over to Grayson. The mandate was clear. The money was to be preserved, with only modest, justified disbursements allowed for family emergencies. Madeline had been furious. She had spent the last 3 years launching a subtle, relentless campaign to access that money. I remembered a family dinner just 6 months ago. Madeline had cornered me in the kitchen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. "You know, Ellie," she had said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You work so much. You look exhausted. Honestly, those bags under your eyes are getting permanent. You should really release some of Nana's funds so I can invest in my new lifestyle app. Grayson says the returns will be massive. We could all be rich, and you could finally quit that boring number-crunching job and get a facial." "The trust is for emergencies, Madeline," I had replied stiffly, "not app startups." She had rolled her eyes, her sweet facade dropping instantly. "God, you are so rigid. It's family money, Ellie, not yours. Stop hoarding it like a jealous spinster." Grayson had always backed her up, offering loud, boisterous arguments about how I was stifling the family's potential. Caleb would just nod, a silent enforcer to Madeline's demands. And Layla would always take Madeline's side. "Just give her a little, Ellie," she would plead. "She has such vision. Why must you be so difficult?" Lying in the hospital bed, the pieces of the puzzle began to snap together with horrifying clarity. Madeline's lavish 30th birthday, the extravagant venue deposit, the sudden, desperate demand for $50,000 at midnight. Madeline wasn't just spoiled, she was desperate. And Layla, my own mother, was willing to throw me to the wolves, ignoring my medical emergency to cover Madeline's tracks. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was too weak, too conditioned to say no. I reached for my laptop bag, ignoring the screaming pain in my abdomen. I pulled out my secure work laptop, flipped it open, and logged into the banking portal, my eyes narrowing as the blue light illuminated the dark hospital room. It was time to stop being the dutiful daughter and start being the auditor. The glowing screen of my secure work laptop was the only light in the dim, quiet hospital room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling not just from the lingering chill of the anesthesia, but from a profound, simmering rage that was beginning to burn away the physical pain in my abdomen. Every breath I took pulled at my fresh stitches, a sharp, constant reminder of my physical vulnerability. But my mind, the analytical, razor-sharp engine that had built my career, was completely numb to the pain. It was locked onto a target. If my family saw me only as a financial resource to be tapped, then I was going to show them exactly what it meant to cross the person holding the keys to the vault. I bypassed the trust portal entirely for the moment. I knew the $50,000 for Madeline's wedding venue was sitting safely in the escrow account my grandmother had established. Instead, I navigated to the portal for Layla's personal finances. Years ago, when my father passed and Layla was drowning in overdue bills and final notices, I had taken over her financial management. I had consolidated her debts, set up a strict budget, and carefully restructured her retirement portfolio. I had legally established myself as her financial proxy to ensure she would never lose her house or go hungry. I had read-only access to monitor her accounts, a safety net I checked quarterly. I hadn't checked it in 4 months. I typed in the credentials, the heavy silence of the room pressing against my ears. The dashboard loaded. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring for a moment. I blinked hard, willing the numbers to change, hoping it was a glitch in the hospital's Wi-Fi. It wasn't. The balance in Layla's primary retirement investment account, a fund that should have held a secure, comfortable $450,000, was sitting at a staggering $412. "No," I whispered to the empty room, the sound barely escaping my lips. "Mom, what did you do?" My hands flew across the trackpad, pulling up the transaction history for the last 120 days. The spreadsheet populated, a cascading waterfall of financial ruin. There were no gradual market losses. There were massive, unauthorized wire transfers, 50,000 here, 75,000 there. They were all routed to a single external account registered to an entity called Maddie Lifestyle Holdings, LLC. But the nightmare didn't stop there. I cross-referenced her credit report, pulling a soft inquiry using my firm's investigative software. 3 new credit cards had been opened in Layla's name in the last 6 months. All of them were maxed out. The purchases were grotesque: first-class flights to Dubai, luxury designer boutiques in Paris, 5-star resort stays in Aspen. My mother, a woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent and complained about the price of eggs, was supposedly buying $20,000 handbags. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Layla hadn't just given Madeline a little help. Madeline had systematically, ruthlessly drained my mother's entire life savings, leaving her completely destitute, and Layla was either entirely complicit or entirely brainwashed. And now, having exhausted Layla's funds, Madeline was coming for the ironclad trust my grandmother had left in my care. I was no longer a passive victim recovering in a hospital bed. I was a strategist, and I held the ultimate leverage. The trust was legally impenetrable without my direct, authorized consent. Madeline could scream, Layla could beg, and Grayson could throw tantrums, but they couldn't touch a single dime of it. I picked up my phone and opened a secure messaging app, navigating to my contact for David, a former colleague who now ran a private corporate intelligence and forensics firm. "Ellie, I need a massive favor. I need a full, deep-dive background check and asset trace on an entity called Maddie Lifestyle Holdings, LLC. I also need the personal financial histories for Madeline last name and Caleb last name. I need to know every debt, every lien, every eviction." "David, it's 2 a.m. You're supposed to be in recovery from surgery. What is going on?" "Ellie, just pull the files, David. Bill my personal account. I need everything you can find by tomorrow morning." "David, consider it done. Rest." I set the phone down. I logged back into the banking portal and initiated a complete, hard freeze on the trust, moving the liquid assets into a secondary holding account that required my physical, notarized signature in person at a bank branch to release. I then placed fraud alerts on Layla's remaining active accounts. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor the only sound keeping me company. Let them celebrate tonight. Let them drink their expensive champagne and toast to their imaginary wealth. The trap was set, the vault was sealed, and the auditor was wide awake. The morning sun was just beginning to cast long, sterile shadows across the linoleum floor of my hospital room when the heavy wooden door slammed open. I didn't flinch. I had been awake for hours, my laptop safely stowed away, my expression carefully composed into a mask of polite indifference. Layla marched into the room, her face flushed, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her fists. Behind her trailed Madeline, looking disheveled but furious. She was still wearing the sequined designer gown from the night before, though the hem was stained and her elaborate updo was falling apart. Caleb lingered in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, trying to project an air of intimidation that completely failed to land. There were no flowers. There were no balloons. There was no gentle inquiry about my pain levels or my surgical wounds. "What did you do?" Layla demanded, her voice shrill, echoing off the bare walls. She marched right up to the edge of my bed, her eyes wide with panic and anger. "I just got an alert from the bank. The trust portal is locked. The venue coordinator called Madeline in tears because the wire was formally rejected. Ellie, what is wrong with you?" "Good morning to you too, Mom," I said smoothly, my voice calm and deliberate. "The surgery went well, thank you for asking. The doctor said if I had waited another hour, the sepsis would have been fatal." Layla waved her hand dismissively, an incredible, why callous gesture that shattered the last remaining fragment of my daughterly devotion. "You are fine, you are sitting up and talking. Stop trying to change the subject. Unlock the account right now. Madeline is humiliated. Her wedding planner is threatening to quit." Madeline stepped forward, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a sneer. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to have my corporate card declined at the after-party breakfast, Ellie? I had to borrow cash from one of Caleb's groomsmen. You are being petty and vindictive just because you don't have a man and you're stuck in here." I looked at my cousin, truly seeing her for the first time. I didn't see a glamorous influencer. I saw a parasite wrapped in silk. "Your corporate card," I repeated, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. "You mean the credit card issued in my mother's name that you maxed out on a trip to Milan last month?" The room went dead silent. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of my heart monitor. Madeline's face drained of color, her mouth dropping open in genuine shock. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in the doorway, his confident posture immediately deflating. Layla blinked, clearly confused, looking back and forth between us. "What are you talking about?" Layla stammered, her voice losing its aggressive edge. "Milan, Madeline went to Milan for a brand partnership. It was a sponsored trip." "No, Mom," I said, my voice hardening. I sat up slightly, ignoring the searing pain in my stitches. "It wasn't sponsored. You paid for it, or rather your credit score did." I turned my gaze back to Madeline, locking eyes with her. "I know about the retirement account, Madeline. I know about Maddie Lifestyle Holdings. I know that you siphoned $450,000 of my mother's money to fund a fake life on the internet." "That is a lie," Madeline shrieked, her voice cracking. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "It's an investment. You don't understand business. You're just a jealous, glorified calculator. It's seed money for my app. The returns are going to be exponential." "An app," I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You spent $70,000 on a luxury car lease. You spent $20,000 on handbags. That isn't software development, Madeline. That is fraud." Layla rushed to Madeline's defense, though her voice trembled. "Ellie, stop it. Grayson explained it all to me. It's a temporary loan. She's going to pay me back double before the end of the year. You just need to release the trust funds so she can secure the venue and keep the momentum going." "The trust is frozen, Mom," I stated with absolute finality. "Permanently, until I say otherwise, and no one in this room is getting a single cent of my grandmother's money." Madeline's eyes narrowed, a vicious, desperate light igniting in them. You can't do that, she hissed, stepping closer to the bed. I will have my father's lawyers drag you into court. We will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. We will destroy your career, Ellie. I will ruin you. Your father, I said softly, leaning back against the pillows, doesn't even have a lawyer on retainer anymore, Madeline. But we can talk about Grayson's finances later. Get out of my room, all of you. I need to rest. You haven't heard the last of this, Madeline screamed, turning on her heel and storming out of the room, shoving past Caleb. Caleb shot me a nervous, panicked look before scurrying after her. Layla lingered for a moment, her hands wringing the strap of her purse. She looked lost, caught between the daughter telling her the brutal truth and the niece promising her a golden fantasy. Ellie, she started, her voice breaking. Leave, Mom, I said, closing my eyes, exhausted to my very core. Just leave. By noon, the hospital room felt suffocating. The confrontation had drained my limited physical reserves, leaving me trembling and nauseous, but I couldn't afford to rest. My phone buzzed constantly on the bedside table. I was receiving a barrage of unhinged text messages from Uncle Grayson, filled with blustering threats about legal action, disownment, and accusations that I was trying to destroy the family legacy. I ignored them all, muting his contact. Then, an email notification chimed from my secure work server. David had delivered the dossier. I opened the encrypted PDF on my laptop, my eyes scanning the heavily detailed pages. David was a master at his craft, and the picture he painted was even worse than I had anticipated. The escalating stakes were no longer just about a wedding venue, they were about total financial collapse. Madeline's business was a complete ghost ship. The LLC had no registered income, no products, no pending patents, and certainly no app in development. It was merely a routing station for the money she stole from my mother. Caleb, her supposedly successful fiancé, was drowning in his own disaster. He had 2 previous bankruptcies. Filed under different middle initials, a trail of unpaid contractors from a failed landscaping business, and an active warrant for unpaid parking tickets in 2 states. They were currently 3 months behind on the rent for their luxury penthouse, and the landlord had filed preliminary eviction notices just last week. And Grayson, the loud, boastful patriarch who claimed to be a venture capitalist, was in the worst shape of all. His massive, sprawling suburban estate was in pre-foreclosure. He had leveraged his home to the hilt to fund a failed restaurant franchise, and the banks were circling. They were all drowning, and Layla's retirement account had been their life raft. Now that it was gone, they were looking at the trust as their only salvation. At 3 o'clock, Layla returned. She came alone this time, creeping into the room like a frightened animal. The aggressive, defensive posture from the morning was completely gone. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she looked 10 years older than she had the day before. She pulled the vinyl visitor's chair close to my bed and collapsed into it, covering her face with her hands. Madeline is hysterical, Layla sobbed quietly, her voice muffled. Grayson called me screaming. He said you are tearing the family apart out of spite. He said you're going to ruin her special day. Ellie, please, just sign the release. We can figure out the retirement money later. She promised me she has investors lined up. I just want peace. She was still struggling. The psychological grip Grayson and Madeline had on her was profound, built on decades of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. She was terrified of their anger, terrified of losing her place in the family hierarchy, even if it meant sacrificing her own daughter and her own survival. Mom, I said gently, carefully shifting my weight so I could face her fully. Look at me. She slowly lowered her hands, her eyes avoiding mine. I am not going to argue with you anymore, I said, my tone shifting from daughter to forensic auditor. I am going to show you. I reached for the thick manila envelope resting on my bedside table. David had sent a physical copy via secure medical courier an hour ago. I pulled out the stack of heavily highlighted documents and laid them on the blanket over my lap. This is not a misunderstanding, Mom. This is a crime, I said firmly, handing her the first document. This is the deed to Grayson's house. Read the notice at the top." Layla took the paper with trembling fingers. She adjusted her reading glasses, her eyes scanning the bold, black text. "Notice of default and intent to foreclose," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up at me, bewildered. "But Grayson said his portfolio was returning 20% this quarter," he said. "He lied," I interrupted, handing her the next document. "This is a background check on Caleb, 2 bankruptcies. He doesn't work in private equity, Mom. He has no income. And this?" I handed her the final, most devastating piece of evidence. "These are the credit card statements opened in your name. Look at the signatures." Layla stared at the brightly colored logos of high-end boutiques and luxury airlines. She stared at the forged signatures at the bottom of the credit agreements, signatures that faintly resembled her own but were clearly practiced and executed by someone else. Madeline. "She told me she needed my social security number to make me an executive board member of her new company," Layla whispered, a look of profound horror washing over her face as the walls of her delusion finally crumbled. "She said it was a formality for the investors." "She stole your identity, Mom. She drained your $450,000, and she maxed out $80,000 in credit under your name to pay for her clothes, her cars, and her vacations," I said, my voice steady, though my heart ached watching my mother's world shatter. "You are completely destitute. If I hadn't frozen the trust, they would have taken that next, and you would have nothing. No home, no retirement, no future." Layla dropped the papers onto the floor as if they had burned her. She buried her face in my hospital blankets and began to weep, a deep, agonizing wail of a woman who finally realized she had traded the daughter who saved her for the family who ruined her. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," she sobbed into the thin cot. "I'm so sorry. What do we do? What do I do?" I placed a comforting hand on her trembling shoulder, my eyes hardening into steel. The spell was broken. The manipulated loved one was finally on my side. "We stop crying," I said softly, looking toward the window, "and we let them dig their own graves in front of everyone." 2 weeks passed. The surgical staples in my abdomen had been removed, leaving a neat, healing pink line, a physical testament to the ordeal I had survived. My physical strength was returning, boo. My mental clarity had never been sharper. Layla and I had spent those 14 days working in absolute secrecy. We had sat at my kitchen table for hours, drinking endless cups of herbal tea as I walked her through every single fraudulent transaction, every forged document, and every lie Madeline had ever told her. We filed police reports for identity theft and elder financial abuse. We retained a ruthless civil litigator from my professional network. We laid the explosive charges. All we needed was for the targets to walk into the blast radius. Grayson, completely oblivious to our preparations and growing increasingly desperate as his creditors circled, demanded a family intervention. He assumed Layla was still under his control and that my hospital isolation had weakened my resolve. He orchestrated a gathering at his sprawling, soon-to-be-foreclosed suburban estate, inviting several of our prominent aunts and uncles to serve as his audience and my judges. I arrived with Layla. The moment we stepped into Grayson's opulent, echoing foyer, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Madeline was holding court in the formal living room, weeping delicately into a tissue while Caleb rubbed her shoulders with exaggerated concern. Our aunts and uncles looked at me with varying degrees of disappointment and judgment. They had been fed the narrative. I was the bitter, wealthy spinster who was single-handedly ruining a beautiful young woman's dream wedding out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. "Ellie, Layla, sit down," Grayson commanded from the head of the massive mahogany coffee table, gesturing to a stiff leather sofa. He was using his booming, authoritative voice, the one that usually cowed his sister into submission. "This family is in crisis, and it ends today." I didn't sit. I remained standing, leaning slightly on my cane for support, though my posture was entirely unyielding. Layla stood right beside me, her chin raised, her hands remarkably steady. "You're right, Uncle Grayson," I said. my voice cutting through the heavy, manufactured sorrow in the room with absolute, icy calm. This family is in crisis, but it has absolutely nothing to do with a wedding venue. Madeline sniffled, looking up with perfectly widened, innocent eyes. Ellie, please, I forgive you for locking the trust. I really do. If we just transfer the funds today, the coordinator said she could. I brought some reading material for everyone, I interrupted smoothly, ignoring her entirely. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out 5 thick, securely bound manila folders. I walked around the room, methodically handing one to Aunt Sarah, one to Uncle David, and one directly to a sputtering Grayson. "What is the meaning of this?" Grayson demanded, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson as he looked at the label on the folder. "That is a comprehensive forensic financial audit," I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every person in the room could hear every single syllable. "You all believe I am hoarding family wealth to spite Madeline. The truth is, there is no family wealth left to hoard, except for the grandmother's trust, which I have permanently secured against fraud." "Fraud?" Aunt Sarah gasped, her hands fluttering to her pearl necklace. "Open the folders," I commanded. I watched the exact moment the collective illusion shattered. I watched their eyes scan the first page, the summary of findings prepared by my private intelligence contact. "Page 2, I narrated, pacing slowly behind the sofa. "You will see the complete depletion of my mother's retirement portfolio. $450,000 systematically wired over the last year to an empty shell corporation called Maddie Lifestyle Holdings, LLC. A company with no tax returns, no products, and no payroll." "That was an investment," Madeline shrieked, leaping to her feet, her delicate victim facade crumbling instantly into sheer, feral panic. "It was seed capital. You have no right to show them my private business ledgers." "It wasn't an investment, Madeline," I countered loudly, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Because page 3 outlines the credit card fraud. 3 platinum accounts opened using my mother's stolen social security number and forged signatures. $80,000 in debt, entirely accrued through luxury retail purchases, international first-class flights, and fine dining. You didn't invest her money. You wore it. You drank it." The room erupted into shocked, horrified whispers. Uncle David looked at Madeline as if she had suddenly grown horns. Caleb backed away from her, his eyes darting toward the front door like a trapped rat looking for an escape route. "This is fabricated," Grayson roared, throwing the folder onto the coffee table so hard the heavy glass shuddered. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at me. "You manufactured these documents to destroy my daughter. Layla, tell them this is a lie." "Gra." Usson turned his imposing, bullying gaze entirely onto my mother, expecting her to fold, expecting her to cower and protect the golden child just as she had done for the last 30 years. Layla did not cower. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, separating herself from me and standing squarely in the center of the room. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a single, heavily stamped legal document. "It is not a lie, Grayson," Layla said. Her voice was quiet, but it possessed a newfound core of absolute iron. "You raised a parasite. She stole my future so she could pretend to be important on the internet." Madeline's mouth dropped open, her face draining of all color. "Aunt Layla, please." Layla didn't even look at her niece. She kept her eyes locked on her brother. "This," Layla said, holding up the document, "is a copy of the formal police report I filed yesterday morning for felony identity theft and elder financial exploitation. And the folder you threw on the table contains the civil suit my lawyer served to the courthouse an hour ago, naming both Madeline and Caleb as co-defendants." You called the police on your own blood," Grayson stammered, his entire imposing frame seeming to shrink before my eyes. The bluster was gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of impending criminal charges. "You are not my blood anymore," Layla said, her voice wavering just slightly before steadying into a pillar of absolute resolve. "My blood is standing right behind me. The daughter I abandoned in a hospital bed while you spent stolen money on a party. I am done being your victim, Grayson, and I am done paying for your daughter's delusions." Madeline let out a horrific, piercing wail, dropping to her knees on the expensive Persian rug. Caleb didn't try to comfort her. He was already slipping out the front door, abandoning the sinking ship without a backward glance. The aunts and uncles were whispering furiously, looking at Grayson with absolute disgust. The public humiliation was absolute, clinical, and entirely of their own making. I watched the empire of lies burn to the ground, feeling nothing but the clean, purifying heat of justice. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely public. I did not need to lift another finger to destroy them. I simply allowed the legal and financial systems to operate precisely as they were designed to when confronted with irrefutable forensic evidence. Within a week of the confrontation, the wedding was officially canceled. The venue coordinator, having seen the bounced checks and the sudden flurry of legal notices, terminated their contract and kept the initial deposit. Caleb, displaying the exact lack of character I had expected from a serial fraudster, quietly packed his bags in the middle of the night and fled the state, leaving Madeline entirely alone to face the impending criminal charges. Using my professional network, I ensured the case file landed on the desk of the most aggressive prosecutor in the white-collar crime division. Because the theft crossed state lines during the Milan trip, and because it involved wire fraud from a protected retirement account, the federal authorities became interested. Madeline was arrested at a luxury coffee shop, her tearful, panicked mugshot a stark contrast to her curated Instagram grid. She was currently out on bail, paid for by a desperate Grayson who had to liquidate his remaining functional assets. But her future consisted entirely of court dates, plea bargains, and inevitable prison time. Grayson's own house of cards collapsed shortly after. Without Layla's money to prop up his failing ventures, the bank finalized the foreclosure on his estate. He was forced to move into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city, his reputation in the business community completely annihilated by the public spectacle of his daughter's crimes. As for me, the vindication brought a profound, lasting peace that I had never experienced before. I had protected my grandmother's legacy, ensuring the trust remained untouched and securely managed for future, actually deserving generations. But the most significant resolution happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, 2 months after the surgery. Layla and I were sitting on the back porch of my townhouse. The weather was turning crisp, hinting at the approaching autumn. I had helped her move out of her large, empty house, which we sold to help recuperate a small fraction of her lost funds, and into a cozy, manageable condo just a few blocks away from me. We were rebuilding her life from scratch on a very strict, fixed budget. She was sipping her tea, watching the wind rustle the leaves in my small garden. She looked older, the stress of the betrayal having carved new lines around her eyes, but there was a lightness to her posture that hadn't been there in decades. The heavy burden of Grayson's expectations was finally gone. "I was doing the math this morning, Lael," I said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. She didn't look at me, keeping her gaze fixed on the garden. "With the condo paid off from the house sale and my Social Security, I can cover my groceries and my utilities. I won't be a burden to you, Ellie, I promise." I set my mug down on the small wicker table. "You were never a financial burden, Mom. I was an auditor. I knew the numbers. The burden was watching you give everything we had to people who didn't care if we lived or died." Layla finally turned to me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I was so blind, Ellie. I was so terrified of losing my brother, of being ostracized by the family, that I offered you up as a sacrifice to keep them happy. I thought you were so strong, so capable, that you didn't need me. I thought you could handle anything. But a mother is supposed to protect her child, even the strong ones." She reached across the space between us and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounded in reality. "I am so incredibly sorry," Layla whispered, a single tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. "I failed you in that hospital. I failed you for years, but I am so proud of the woman you are. You saved my life, Ellie, and you saved me from myself." I looked at our joined hands. The anger, the bitter resentment that had poisoned my heart for so long, had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, solid foundation. It would take time to fully rebuild the trust between us. The scars of her abandonment would always be there, just like the surgical scar on my abdomen. But the infection was gone. The toxic elements had been excised from our lives permanently. "I know, Mom," I said gently, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We have a lot of work to do, but we're going to be okay, just the two of us." We sat together on the porch as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the garden. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the crushing weight of family obligation. I had fought for my peace, I had exposed the truth, and I had emerged victorious. The ledger was finally balanced, and my future was entirely my own.